Well, hello everyone. This is actually the first time that IATA has held a panel discussion on payments, but I think what you'll discover as we speak to our panelists is that there is already quite a lot of movement, quite a lot of momentum behind this topic. So I want to introduce our panelists. We have Tamur Goudarzi, who's from Lufthansa, EVP of Strategy at Lufthansa. We have Swati Tandon, who comes to us from McKinsey and Company. We have Christine Rovelli, who's the Chief Revenue Officer at Finnair, and Pascal Burg from Edgar, Dunn and Company. So I want to throw initially to Tamur on the other end there, just to sort of set the stage as to where we're at, why this is such a big topic. Why are we talking about this now?
Well, I think the video showed already some good numbers, so now you can hear me. Sorry for the voice, also the air conditioning. The video showed already some very good numbers. So this is huge. This is not just something that we're discussing here today, and I'm not sure how much you are actually discussing it in your boardrooms today. I doubt that this is at the moment the prime topic of many board sessions. It's because payment is an intricate topic, it's technical, but it has massive, massive ramifications for the airline industry. And these numbers, 22 billion, that's not small pocket money. So one big question before we come to the topics is how much emphasis you want to give to this topic as an airline, as a supplier, as a partner. Not only the experts, I think we have to bring this topic back to the boardrooms. And this is my plea, and we will talk about this, that we manage this together, because this is nothing we can handle each airline on its own. So that is the first thing, I think, how we do it. But maybe we can dig now a bit deeper into the topics from a customer, but also from a B2B perspective.
Yeah, let's talk about the pocket money that you mentioned. The 22 billion number is from your research, Pascal. Tell us why is it? I mean, this is an industry that's expected to make a profit collectively of about 36 billion this year. 22 billion is a good chunk of that. Why is it so expensive?
Yeah, so it's a big number. So we quantified the $22 billion. This is total costs for the industry across all markets, all channels. It's about 2.3% of a ticket value. So it's a big number because the airline industry is very card-centric. A lot of consumers and customers pay by card. Now, there's a reason for that. Cards are valuable, they're global, it's real time, so they bring value, so there's a big cost. But also what we try to do in our study is show the impact on the revenue side. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about that today. If you don't have the right payment process in place, you can really upset customers, right? You might decline the card, and we know that when the card is declined, up to 8% of consumers don't buy from you, so you can lose revenue. And if you don't have the local payment method for a country like India, I'm sure we'll talk about that as well, potentially
Wait, is this one back? This one's back.
Yeah, back.
Great. Swati, talk to me, because McKinsey has put out a study which tells us more or less what can be done. I mean, you can't wipe out that 22 billion entirely in cost. So realistically, what is the potential saving and indeed revenue opportunity here?
Yeah. I mean, look, as it was just mentioned, it's not a topic that has been top priority for many CEOs and board discussions. So we have tried to make only an initial estimate. And the way we've thought about it is that we've said, what is the cost saving that you could do if you introduced a healthy mix of alternative payment solutions? Because today 70% approximately happens through credit cards. Then what is the revenue opportunity that you have? Because you have about 25% dropout rates today on sales through credit cards, of which 8% customers approximately never come back. So that's lost revenue for the airline. And the third one, which was very interesting, is what is the implication on working capital? So actually, airlines are incurring about 2 billion, let's say, give or take, in working capital cost when they actually collect these payments, and then they get it back into their system. Interestingly, they're collecting that money also partly on behalf of governments, because taxes are included there, airport charges, because that are included there. So we took a rough estimate to say, if you were able to optimize, because as you rightly mentioned, you can't take away the cost. But if you could optimize, what could that number be? And the initial estimate is somewhere between, let's say, 10 to 14 billion, which is not a small number. So out of that, let's say around 2 to 3 is direct cost. The rest is actually revenue opportunity. How do you protect the lost revenue? How do you activate new segments of the market? Particularly important for emerging markets. If you want to scale up in India, and as the Prime Minister mentioned in his speech yesterday, he wants to have tier 2 cities connected to each other. Well, the majority of your customers there don't have a credit card.
Yeah.
So there is an indirect impact as well, because they will always keep going to tour operators, whereas you want to build your direct sales channel network.
Yeah.
So how do you have that customer on your own website? You need to have payment solutions that can cater to them.
Christine, I talked about momentum at the beginning of this. I think I was alluding to what you are doing at Finnair. Tell us what is already underway.
Sure. So I guess in terms of payments, Swati made a really good point when it hasn't gotten the attention that it needs to get in the boardroom. But I think for us, it's been a confluence of factors that have led us to where we are right now with payments. The first was we really took a look at how payments are done during COVID because we had to reverse the entire chain. And that's when we started to see what was possible and also what we were doing that we didn't need to be doing. Secondly, we have a couple new generations now who are digital natives. They want to pay a different way, even if it's not jurisdiction related. People want to be able to split the cost of their group trip the way they split the cost of a restaurant. And that is something that is quite challenging today with the payment methods we've had. So as we were discussing earlier, we were quite excited a couple weeks ago to go out with the first native order, which for those of you who are not aware, allows us to sell other things than airline and airline-related ancillaries without having to attach it to a P&L or to a PNR, which really opens up the potential for payments, although the mechanisms still need to be worked on quite a bit.
And this is sort of part of the customer experience issue, right? That this isn't just about saving sort of blank saving money. This is about meeting the customer where they are and offering them a more sort of retail style experience. And this is critical, Tamur, isn't it? That this is sort of embedded in the experience of
absolutely,
interacting.
but yesterday when there was these impressive numbers we've seen about India growing and airports but also customers, there came the questions, what do you do with all the Indians who cannot pay with their credit card? And then it was mentioned they don't. They have leapfrogged. Yeah. So there is an own payment form. There are alternative form of payments now out there in the geographies, and credit cards will play an important role, but they're much more Northern American, let's say, or European to a certain degree, but in other parts of the world has changed. So they are expecting as customers a different service from the airlines by region, and you have to have that whole suite as global industry. You have to have a whole suite what this customer expects. So, and this doesn't mean just the last point, the pressure point that you pay. It actually should be seamless. It should be simple, and we know we have some intricate technical issues there, but it can also be an experience. Because the customer, he expects that we provide him with a wallet, that he can store additional features on his wallet. Take the example, somebody is collecting money for his wedding trip from his family and friends. This is an experience. It brings actually your simple payment function into a full experience. When you announce your wedding, when you bring your friends this notification of where you can pay into, and this is a collective experience again. So many of those experiences can be commercialized. They're in the customer interest, and it's not just the formal pressing of the button at the end of the process on your website. So let's think about these things and bring it together with the loyalty aspect, which is also important. In the US, already with the credit card system, it is a major part of the profit pool of the carriers, but there's much more to get. So, but we still have to get the ducks in a row. That's why I think it's more needed than just saying it's an experience. We as an industry have to face this, and we have to act on standards. We have to bring this together on the standard side. We have to support the technical piping. I think that's important, and we have to think about alternatives that we can offer the customer from a joint industry perspective. And I think there's more to get. Yeah.
And this is something that you are personally invested in.
Yes, for sure. And we, Lufthansa, for the direct channels, we have already broken free, so to say, with a payment hub that Lufthansa Systems. By the way, if someone is interested, they're also at the conference. A payment hub has been established where we can now put alternative form of payments into the payment hub. A wallet can be in there. And with that, you have already a central function that allows you to offer those services. It's a starting point. But if each airline does that, that's the first step. We need to also collectively do it. And that's why I call for action. And we should actually, like we have done on the offers and orders side, we have brought coalition of the willing together in a consortium under the guidance of IATA. And you just mentioned you had your first native order live, so Finnair is the leader there in execution. But it's a collective topic, and I would like to ask for call for action that the coalition of the willing also comes together on the payment side. And I think we have first interest in Europe. We talked to some of the other carriers in the interest of the customer, very important. This is something where we can also work together, like we have done on the architecture on the consortium for offers and orders. We can do this now also on the payment side. And I think we should, after this conference, we should start this work because it's high noon, as you can see what the customer expects worldwide.
Pascal, I'll come to you in just 1 second, but Christine, just quickly, as the other airline representative here, what do you think?
I mean, I can't disagree with anything you've said, but I think what we started the conversation with, which is this needs to be elevated to a board-level discussion, is what it's really going to take for that to come together.
Pascal, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe to illustrate, give a couple of numbers to illustrate what Tamur was saying too, because I know CEOs like numbers, right? Yeah. So the importance of offering the relevant local form of payment as a revenue driver. India is a perfect example. The form of payment is called UPI, so it's really using real-time bank transfer instead of cards. It represents about 64% of e-commerce in India today, 64% of e-commerce today, and 300 million consumers use it in India. You know, so already if you're an airline not accepting UPI, potentially you can't even sell to this local Indian population. On the card side, a lot of people say, well, what can I do on the card side? To give you an example, we worked with an airline in Asia that was selling a lot into the US. And of course, in the US, you accept Visa, MasterCard, and so on. And they had never looked at the decline rate. Right. Because the card can be declined. Yeah. Actually, one client calls it an insult rate, because consumers feel insulted, right? If they go to the payment page and their card was declined. And that airline looked at it for the first time. And in the US, 55% of cards were declined, just because of the way the airline had set up the process. Wow. So 55% of consumers are going through the whole process, spend 20 minutes finding the flight, got all excited, put their card number into the web page, and it was declined. You know, so you can imagine how bad that is, and that will result in lost sales. So hopefully this is a couple of numbers to convince that, couldn't agree more that topic needs to be at the sea level. It's a really
and I think that gives you a sense of how sort of low the starting point here is in some ways. I mean, airlines, it's such a legacy system in so many cases, notwithstanding, of course, the Indian one that I was roundly corrected on yesterday, that turning it around is quite... I mean, you were telling me that there's one click does not exist for airlines, even though we're so used to it when it comes to the retail side of things.
I mean, some airlines do it, and I think some of the airlines on the panel, hopefully, they do it. Right. But one click, I mean, Amazon, invented one click, had a patent on it for many years. And of course, if you want to upsell or cross-sell and be a retailer, you need to make it easy and not get customers to re-enter the card number. I mean, it sounds very basic, but it's one of the things that we see many airlines don't do yet.
I think, as a consumer, it's a high-friction moment when you have to enter all of your card details. I want to, the sort of the sticky part of this, I think, many of the people in the audience are probably loyalty scheme members, have co-branded credit cards, is that while the airline industry is losing money on these credit card fees, you're also especially in the US, highly dependent on the revenue that they generate in terms of miles. I think the statistic is that 1% of GDP in the US is transacted on the Delta credit card. I mean, it's just massive. So, Swati, maybe as someone who isn't in the industry, do you want to take that? How do you let these two things, the innovation on the payment side and the dependency on credit cards in some markets, coexist?
I think we can all agree that it's not an either-or, right? Nobody is saying that the payments should evolve in a way that we don't have credit cards in the future. They play a very critical role for many, specifically full-service carriers that have a very wide base of loyalty passengers that are still linked to credit cards. But as they say, need is the mother of all inventions. So in India, the UPI was developed simply because if I can buy a water bottle through a UPI payment, which is not even 2 cents, why can I not buy an airline ticket? I think we're seeing the same kind of trends also come up very aggressively in Africa. So moving back a little bit, to the credit card droppage rate, in addition to droppage, there is a whole insecurity around frauds. That is another point in the emerging market why people are hesitating to use credit cards, because it opens you up to fraud risk as well. So I think in the end state, it's going to be a journey where, I'm stating the obvious, where the current payment methodologies will continue to grow and scale, but a new set of innovation needs to come in, whether it's from an experience point of view or opening up to a new customer segment altogether in the emerging market, and it's already happening. I mean, in the Middle East, we're already starting to see some of the big carriers think about, do we want to introduce the wallet? It hasn't happened yet, but the conversations are very real. The last conversation I heard, which was, they were joking about it, but they were saying, well, people are buying bags on installments. They can buy holidays on installments, right? They can buy that experience on installments. So the importance of payments, people have just started to realize that, because it is when the customer comes on your sales channel. If the payment acts as a friction point, you really lose trust.
Yeah.
And if the payment is one click and easier and there are many options, you actually create loyalty, and we haven't yet quantified that. So we're expecting both to continue, but a lot of innovations to happen. We're just seeing the faster pace of innovations in the emerging markets because the need is higher.
I mean, I think we've seen in the history of how payment changes are enacted that it happens at different speeds over the course of the world. The key example being that the US brought in chip and PIN, I think, almost a decade after most European countries. There's two different parts of this, right? There's the B2C, the direct-to-consumer payment innovation, and then there's on the corporate side. Christine, do you want to talk about, because obviously you've already started innovating when it comes to direct-to-consumer products. What about on the corporate side?
Well, that's a different game, because you introduce the GDS system, and of course a lot of corporates go through travel agents for good reason. But again, the travel agent space has been used to innovating kind of on the airline's dime, and now that that's changing, there's a lot of disconcertment in the market. I think we have one large U.S. carrier that tried to make a change, and unfortunately was not able to do that to the extent that they wanted to, and so. Who pays for all this development is going to be a very pertinent question when you're talking about B2B. B2C, well, we all kind of have to pay, and that makes it a little bit easier, but B2C remains challenging.
Yeah. Do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I think we covered the B2C part, and just let me stress again, it's not replacing credit cards. Credit cards play an important role, and they have done a great job of adding additional values to the customers. Otherwise, these loyalty programs in combination with the credit card wouldn't be so popular. So I think there's even more partnership possible, but at what cost? And what you've seen in terms of alternative form of payments on the B2C side, that reduces cost to a certain degree already. When you penetrate more with alternative form of payments, you have also on the B2B side. So when we talk about corporates, out of the 22 billion, that number was shown before, around 7 billion is on the B2B side with the corporates. And there's a funny situation for an industry. 90% of all the payments in the corporate side are done with traditional credit cards. In other industries, it's only 10%. So exactly the other way around. That means for us there is something to change, because on the corporate side there can be also alternatives. And we have trialed last year, and we are live with the first case. You always need a partner, corporate, travel partners in this case, a corporate who has worked with us, that we have shown and proven that in connection with the needs of that corporate in terms of data, in terms of settlement, there is a possibility to have an alternative. And we have done together as a use case with that corporate and with IATA. And IATA has a facility for that. That's PSP, which is a very cost-efficient means of actually doing a settlement. And we have done a live case where we have proven with that corporate, with the needs that the corporate has, and together by settling it via IATA PSP, that is possible. So this is a live case, and that's something I think we can further discuss, and we should discuss in a consortium of the coalition of the willing. We can look how can we expand that. Maybe there can be a bigger role for that. It's just one example. There are other technological support mechanisms that we can employ, but we need to tackle also the B2B side, and I think there's a great opportunity in terms of cost efficiency, but also in terms of value that we can give those corporates as an industry.
Yeah, if I can add to that, right, I think it's a matter of habit. This is how we've done it, and hence we have this trend in this industry. If you could give a better service to the corporates, why would they not opt for it? So it comes back to your point of we need to make this a priority and innovate and probably start here because their needs are more clearer, less diverse, and easier to tackle. And this is why it's a use case that is being discussed very heavily in the part of the world I operate in as well.
Yeah, and I think the experience is not perfect, right? I mean, everyone's tried to book through their corporate travel agent and found that they don't have all of the flights available in various cases. Did you want to chime in on
that? Maybe a couple of ideas about innovation in corporate payment using two assets that you already have in the airline industry. One of them, Tamur just mentioned, is IATA developed this billing and settlement plan, BSP, in the 70s. IATA actually was very innovative to find a way to move money from travel agents, to airlines worldwide. It's quite amazing if you think about it, to do that in the 70s. And so that could be leveraged, so that's what Tamur mentioned. Another example to show how innovative you guys can be in the airline sector, in 1936, you invented the first payment system. Everybody thinks that the first payment system was Amex or Diners Club in New York in the 40s. Actually, it was in 1936, the airline set up UATP. It was set up by American Airlines, and then you have other airlines like Japan Airlines and Lufthansa, with AirPlus that became active. So this is an asset where airlines can become their own issuer of a payment product for the corporate user. So these are assets that exist, they can be leveraged, and of course there's also new innovation, leveraging stable coins and so on, but that's maybe more long term, depends on your time horizon.
Well, I mean, should we talk about some of the sort of the potential new technology that could be brought in here? I mean, obviously there's the sort of optimizing the credit card experience, and that could include sort of platforms that use credit cards like Apple Pay, but beyond that, I mean, what are the other options?
I think you're right. I mean, of course, optimizing cards, I agree with Tamur. I mean, they provide value, they're not going to go away, so of course you've got to optimize how you accept Visa, MasterCard, and Amex, and many of you are users of Google Pay or Apple Pay. That's hopefully it talks to you, right? Again, to avoid the friction and so on. And then it's exploring the alternatives. The main alternative in the near term are the real-time bank transfer mechanisms that are available now. So we talked about UPI in India. There's PIX in Brazil. We're going to be in Brazil next year. They also have a very successful real-time bank transfer there. Thailand, Australia, there are many countries that now have these real-time bank transfers that can be used. I think earlier we talked about wallets. There are many countries where wallets can be used. So there are alternatives that can be explored and tested.
I mean, it's interesting you talk about the early innovation from the aviation industry when it comes to payments, because I feel like what's happening now, and feel free to correct me on this, is that there's a reactivity, right? You see what's happening in retail, for example, and you want to emulate that. But is there a way for the airline industry to get ahead and do its own innovation, perhaps even more so on the corporate side? Christine, what do you think?
There's always a way. The question is who's going to pay for it, and what's the value. So right now, I would say that in line with Lufthansa, we have been also working with some of our biggest corporate customers in Finland on going straight to NDC. But again, that requires them to adopt NDC. That requires them to take on a cost as well. So it's a matter of positioning it so that both sides get something, right? If we can go to direct payments from a business, you can say, well, we've avoided the commission. We can also work on the FX rate if that's something where you will see a real value, but it requires you to make some implementation on your side. And that's always been the difficulty, so that when we innovate, we have to really overprove the business case in order to get them to invest first and then see the savings later. Otherwise, we're trapped in the same cycle where we're just being billed by a travel agent or by a corporate to implement the system we want them to, and then we're back in the days of Sabre and Apollo and things like that.
Is there enough, and perhaps Tamur, you can take this, is there enough of a system in place for airlines to sort of test ahead of time what works and what doesn't, to be able to really understand before launching headlong into a new payment product, which could obviously fail, what it is that customers want?
Well, the new technology allow for also synthetic testing if you want. So you can trial out with even synthetic customers these days now, certain products, and you can try that out with new technologies. But important is, I think, we have to get first a lot of the brick and mortar right. So these are three things that we basically manage. Number one is it has to be seamless. So the customer really has to have that experience of a seamless, trusted service, and for that you have to get the piping right first. Number two, you will have to look at all your touch points, that where you actually see the possibility to then implement this form of payment in a seamless way. So all along the journey, where do you actually have that chance to get the payment right, not just at the end of the process in the booking form. And number three, the alternative form of payments that we need to get to establish. So this is the basic suite of topics we need to cover. You're using then these new technologies that are currently superseding everybody from AI and other formats, where you can then use them for testing, you can use them for fraud prevention, you can use them for authentication, you can use them for standard setting, and all these topics will help us as enablers then to get those topics for the end customer right. So there is I would say, duality of brick and mortar elements, and there is also the new technology that you apply then to get the customer really to what he expects from us now these days. And that is changing rapidly, so we need to adjust.
The question that you keep alluding to, Christine, on who is going to pay for it. I mean, obviously, a lot of the investment will have to come from the airlines, and that's a challenge, as we know.
It's not obvious.
It's
not obvious.
Who are the other stakeholders here? Who stands to benefit, and who are you working on bringing in to invest in these changes?
I think if you look at the whole payment stream, it's more a matter of who is exiting, right? So if you have a payment stream, and we were talking briefly about this before, all of our payment architecture has been built up over many, many years, and we've kind of patched it forward to the next innovation, but what happens then is if you want to take on a new payment rail, you have to somehow make it work with all of the rest of the functionality that you have, and there's two ways to do that. Either you add another module, which adds another cost, or you start looking at the whole chain and saying, which of these can I get rid of? And when you start dropping things that cost money, you can actually net, not have to spend anything. But that's a lot of risk, actually, to do that to your payment stream, because as Pascal said, if you start getting a lot of refusals, you lose a lot of sales, and that's immediate. So who's going to pay for it? Well, you would say whoever benefits the most from it, but it's not that straightforward. When you have a sort of a payment stream that's patched together, you have the opportunity to do things a completely different way. And I think our host airline is probably one of the ones that's very good at doing that. But for the rest of us, it requires a lot of very careful tinkering. So it isn't clear at the end of the day that the person who benefits is the person who would pay.
Yeah, Pascal, on the whole issue of mitigating risk in this, what's your view on how airlines can do that as they try to innovate?
Well, it takes some resources, right? So when we help airlines, we help them with a business case. It's pretty clear. You need to have some internal resources. I mean, you can use consultants, but eventually you need expertise internally. You need people that develop a roadmap, a plan that you need to monitor it. So that takes some resources. I mean, some airlines have teams of 5, 10, 15 FTEs in payments. You ask about why they may be behind some of the online travel agencies or e-commerce retailers. If you look at the Booking.com of this world and others, they have hundreds of people doing payment. Now, I'm not suggesting that airlines need hundreds of people. Don't worry, I'm not saying that. But some internal expertise to manage the different types of risk, right? There's the market risk, there's fraud risk. So it takes some internal expertise. Definitely takes some technology. Definitely agree with Christine that a lot of airlines have set up something for their mobile, some payment for their online web and so on. Ideally, you want a single platform, either like what Lufthansa is doing internally, or you outsource it, but you think about it structurally, and then you can do testing, A/B testing, and then you can monitor: do you have too much fraud? Do you need to be a bit more careful or not? So it takes some internal expertise, it takes some technology. But it's feasible. It's not boiling the ocean. The technology is out there. There are a lot of vendors that are available. There's a lot of learnings from other airlines that have been successful at it. And I think you can look at online travel agencies and e-commerce retailers to see how they're doing payment, especially as airlines want to become retailers and sell other products beyond airline tickets.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I go back to the retail experience, Swati, because your research shows that most of the way to eat into that 22 billion is from revenue generating. Can you talk to us a bit more about how that works? I mean, it was what, 2 to 3 in terms of cost savings, and then possibly 10 billion plus in terms of revenue generation.
And I think that's an underestimation, right? Because that 10 billion refers basically, today you have, as I mentioned, 25% decline rate, 8% doesn't come back. So there is a big chunk of that. There is a reasonable chunk of ancillary revenue sales that you can do better, to your point, if you have the payment systems sort of lined up in a better way. But if and so that is what the 8 to 10 is talking about. There is a big number that has been circulating in the industry for a while now, saying that we have another 30 to 40 billion of opportunity if we were to retailize the airlines industry in the right way. And almost everybody talks about the fact that getting your payment systems right is the key enabler for that. You need to really innovate to add new products in, whether it's your holidays experience, whether it's installment-based payment, understand your customers better. You need to know who's buying on your airline to have a credit assessment of them to increase the suite of products that you had. So the initial 8 to 10 billion that is estimated in revenue protection links to our current businesses. It's essentially leakages and enhanced sales of ancillary. But then there is this whole pot that we didn't even talk about, which is the big retailization number that the industry talks about, of introducing a whole new suite of ancillary products that we don't sell today, which everybody talks about, and I would love to hear your inputs on it, saying that payments is the biggest enabler that you need there, because you need to understand your customer better. Yeah. And you need to understand their needs better, their credit worthiness better, and how they're going to buy better to be able to sell it to them more proactively.
Tamur, do you want to weigh on that?
No, I think this is the big prize to win. The difficulty often is now how to tackle this in your boardroom. Yeah. So I think what we should take away from today is that how to make this topic a top priority in your own boardroom. That's what I said initially. And how do I convince my executive suite that this is something they should prioritize and put money into?
How are you doing that?
So I think the first thing is actually to get the piping right, the 3 things I mentioned before. What does each airline need now to get these things right? What resources do you need? What investment do you need? With who you have to partner? I think that's from the airline perspective. And I think what's important for us as an industry is we need to bring the standards back to the table. The standards we're having is 1980s standards. And we have to agree on how this transaction will be executed. Otherwise, it's actually done by others for us as it's now. And I think that's something where we have to also come together. It's also the question of the workflows that we can agree upon, the architecture. And as I said, on the B2B side, we can also work. So there are 2 sides of it, what an airline can do and agree on it as a top priority, and the other one we collectively can do.
Is there appetite to do that? I mean, there's a lot of things that airline CEOs are now having to deal with, and a lot of them are going to take money off the bottom line if they're not careful. Christine, I'll throw this to you. Is there appetite? I mean, obviously with Finnair, you are already working on this, but broadly in the industry, is it your sense that there is a momentum here and that people are willing to tackle this?
Not nearly as much as there needs to be, because it just doesn't get the attention that it needs to get. But I think as we move towards selling things other than air travel as part of an offer and an order, people will ask the obvious question: well, I buy this in installments. Why can't I buy an airline ticket the same way? I buy this, using Apple Pay you can use, but they're going to say, well, this is an airline ticket. What makes it? If we are going to say that we are going to offer this alongside all of the other products, not just air travel and its ancillaries, then we also have to match that with the payments and payment methods that are used for those things. And I think it will become more urgent. It will become more attention getting in the boardroom, but it would be great, as you're doing, to get in front of it, actually, so that it's already there and the customer doesn't have to ask.
Pascal, there's a level of risk that we haven't touched on yet, which is the sort of geopolitical risk around payments. The fact that when we look at the dependency on credit cards as it exists and as it will continue to exist, the main credit card companies are American, and we see a sort of level of protectionism coming into the world. What do you think airlines need to know about that?
Yeah, it's both a risk and an opportunity. So you're completely right. We've been talking about cards in general. Actually, there are two types of cards. There are the international cards, Visa and Mastercard being, of course, the two biggest, and Amex and others. And then in specific countries, you've got so-called domestic cards. So I come from a country, France, that has a French domestic card called carte bancaire since 1984. Yeah. Actually, it was a socialist economy minister that woke up one day and said, we need a domestic card. There's also one in many other countries. And the trend we're seeing over the past years, Russia set up their own, MIR, to be independent from Visa, Mastercard. Turkey set up Troy, it's called Troy, interestingly. And now we see an increasing number of countries, J1 in UAE, Meta in Egypt, MADA in Saudi Arabia. So a lot of countries are setting up their domestic cards. It's a risk and an issue because it creates fragmentation and complexity, which typically means extra cost. But it creates an opportunity as well because a lot of these cards may have lower decline rates, potentially lower cost. So it's for the airline to decide what are the key markets where I might look at these as potentially an opportunity. But it's definitely a trend we're seeing. It's likely that there'll be quite a few of these domestic cards being set up in the coming years.
Does that strengthen, Tamur, do you think, the argument for airlines to become their own issuers?
Again?
Does that strengthen the argument for airlines to become their own issuers?
Well, I don't think we have to become issuers, but I think what you've seen is that the customer votes with his feet or with his clicking of the button on his own, on her own, in every geography a bit differently. And I think we as a global business need to cater for that. That different needs, that means the fundamental ways the customer wants to act, he doesn't ask us in the end because he does it everywhere else, is something we have to guarantee. That means on the regulatory front, we have to make sure that this is not impeded, and that needs advocacy also. Another topic where we have to come together, that we very much work on this, that this freedom of executing like a customer wants is maintained. And in case geopolitical block building is continuing more, that's becoming even more important for us now as a collective airline industry to act upon that, so that we don't get those ways of executing payments being closed in some way. So that's really, really important, that we don't actually let this happen, but also where it's still regulated or over-regulated, that we also act that it becomes freer and the customer can use those opportunities that he can use in other parts of the world maybe. So that's something where we have to be careful and we have to be watchful. So that's adding probably to the topics that such a consortium of coalition of the willing can also act upon with the support of IATA. I think we have to have here a collective approach.
Yeah, and I think that gets to the point of this making, I mean, best case scenario for airlines, it makes you more nimble, right? So that you can operate in different markets in a world where we are seeing a lot of fragmentation in the way people use payments, markets moving at different speeds. Do you think that's essentially what airlines should strive for?
Look, I think I would agree that there's definitely an industry-wide education on the topic that is needed, and to the extent that collaboration can happen, it would be beneficial because it is a complex topic to handle, right? If it wasn't a complex topic to handle, we would have seen significant strides already. I personally believe that, ever since we have collectively started talking about this topic along with IATA, and we take it to different CEOs and boardrooms, the numbers stick. Yeah. Nobody has said these numbers seem unreasonable. People said, yeah, that seems in the realm of possibility. So that means the more we have this conversation and the more formal collaboration we get going on the topic, the more results we're likely to see. Now, there will be certain parts of the world that will innovate faster because it is the need for those worlds to grow, right? But I think the industry-wide collaboration probably is the right answer given the complexity that's involved in this process.
Christine, do you agree? I mean, I think the other side to this, if we're playing devil's advocate, is that this could be a way for airlines to differentiate themselves as well. So on the one hand, the need for collaboration, but then you also want to be the most convenient, the easiest place to buy an airline ticket with the most different sort of additions that you can add in as you do the offer and order system.
Yeah, so I would definitely go toward the latter because if we stay as an innovator, we have our own, secret thing. The airline industry isn't like that. You look at the alliances, you can buy a ticket on Finnair, but you could end up flying on British Airways. Yeah. We can't really afford to have discrete solutions like that. We need to be as an industry, kind of aligned on the payments and be able to take advantage of the needs that travelers have and serve those.
And I think that's probably a good place to end on, just to repeat Tamur's call for action and the need for collaboration in the industry as they move towards this sort of era, I think, of innovation and tailoring of solutions to the customer. So thank you very much to our esteemed panelists, and I will hand over to the next.
Thank you for having us.